Have you ever been stuck on a big decision? High stakes, but your brain just keeps bouncing like a pinball machine? That's where today's guest comes in. Knapp, New York Times bestselling author of Sprint and creator of the Google Ventures Design Sprint. His new book, Click, is all about making better decisions, and he is here to share the frameworks he uses in his own life. We dig into magic lenses for seeing choices from fresh angles, smarter ways to spend your time, and why sometimes the best move is walking away from money. By the end, you're going to have a practical toolkit to cut through the noise and make clearer, more confident decisions.
Okay, this is going to come across as a shameless book plug right off of the bat. But in the new book is about this new sprint process that we run with the startups we invest in. And a part of the process is making complex decisions. So you're a startup, you're beginning your company, and you're trying to figure out a lot of things. Who's our customer? What problem are we solving for them? We cover all this stuff in this foundation sprint, which is what the book Click is about. The second half is sort of, okay, we've established a bunch of these baseline things. What do we think is going to make us stand out in the market? But then there are a lot of different approaches we might take to doing whatever that is. Which is the best approach? And so there's a structure that we use to help think through this complex decision where you want to weigh different perspectives, different ways of looking at it, and not fall prey to the biases that we all have about, we have limitations in our brain. There's only so much we can keep in our heads at once. So we have recency bias and tend to have a hard time weighing the thing that we just heard versus the thing that we heard at the beginning of the meeting or earlier today or 3 weeks ago. Anyway, in my day-to-day life, I also have decisions to make that are too complicated to easily weigh. And so one of the experiments I've been doing recently is using the same method we use on our startups on myself. And so it's charting out these different perspectives, looking at them all at once and trying to see, okay, which of these perspectives really is the right way to look at it? And perhaps is there a pattern? Does one solution or one answer consistently show up in kind of the top right of these charts, which is sort of the good part?
Now, are you talking about magic lenses?
I am. Yeah, this is magic lenses. Yes.
Okay. Can we go into more detail there? Because I would love to hear just on a day-to-day, like in your day-to-day, how do you use the magic lenses process? And maybe if we could go into more detail as to what that involves.
Yes. Well, first I'll preface by saying in my day-to-day life, it's only a big decision that warrants using magic lenses, because when you hear me describe magic lenses, you might say, whoa, that's a lot. I don't want to do that when I'm picking my lunch, So if you're looking at the menu at the sandwich shop, this is not the time. But, if you're trying to decide, if your kid is trying to decide what to do after they've graduated from school, if you're trying to decide what to do with your career, or, if you're trying to decide what kind of car to buy, things of this nature where it's like, well, there are a lot of things to weigh. They are real life issues, but they're big. Okay, so here's what magic lenses is. A simple idea, which is that you make a 2x2 chart for every perspective that you think is an important perspective for thinking about a question. So to use the example of the car that I just described, you're trying to decide what kind of car should I get. It can be very overwhelming. There's so many options, so one way of thinking about the decision is cost. What's the cost of purchasing the car? What do I anticipate the ongoing maintenance or fuel or lack thereof, if it's electric, costs might be? And so you can imagine a 2x2 chart of cost with, upfront costs and ongoing costs. And then you might have 5 or 10 different cars you're thinking about. You'd assign each one a color sticky note and you put them on there. And we do a lot of this stuff in Miro, which is an online whiteboard, but you might do this in real life. Okay, so now I've got one chart, and maybe there's one in the top right or some, I have 1 or 2 or 3 up there look pretty good. Well, now we look at something else like maybe reliability, or maybe which one's the most fun to drive. When I'm working with a startup, there are consistently 4 lenses that are always a good idea for any kind of project they might be working on. And the first one of those is the pragmatic lens. So if you imagine your stereotypical engineer who perhaps is concerned with what's the fastest thing to build, what's the most expensive thing to build. So we want the cheap to build and fast to build. That would be the top right of the pragmatic lens. And then a startup should think about growth. So where are there the most customers that this solution might reach? And how easy is it for people to adopt this thing? And we could chart all the options there. And then we might think about money. Which of these has the highest long-term value and the most potential paying customers? And then we, of course, should think about the customer. And in fact, this might be the most important lens. Which best solves the problem that we believe customers have? And which one of these is the easiest to use and adopt? And so this set of charts, if we plot all of our options in color on those, we can see like maybe the green one is always in the top right. Well, great. Maybe we should do that. Or maybe it's a mix, but one of those feels the most right. And when we're doing this with a startup, once we've gone through some basic ones, the obvious ones, we start to create some new custom fine-tuned perspectives. Anyway, it's a lot to hold in your head, even me describing it, but the point of this is that I bounce from one thing to another. It's like I'm a pinball machine in my head. And the same thing happens with teams. And when you have a whole team of people, even if you just have 2 founders or 3 founders, they're pinballing around between these things. So when we make it plain and we think if you had a team of advisors who had these different perspectives, what would each one of them say? And then what are the other viewpoints that you think might be interesting? Let's craft a chart for those. It's so helpful. It's like if you're a Harry Potter fan, there's the pensieve where they take the memories out of their minds and then you can kind of go into the story.
So how do you know that you've got the right or the best lenses when you're thinking through, cost and pragmatism and growth and anything else with any kind of decision? How do you get to that point where you're like, yes, these will be the themes or the lens or the criteria for these 2x2s?
Those 4 that I mentioned, those classic 4 come from our experience working with a lot of startups, and these perspectives would always be useful in every case. So those I feel comfortable if you're talking about a business question, thinking about the customer, thinking about pragmatism, thinking about money, which you're running a business, and thinking about growth. You're not going to go wrong thinking about those perspectives. But for the others, and again, this is going to get a little nerdy, but what we do is have every possible approach. We list as many as we can, and then we choose the top few. So if we're working with a startup, we have one person who's the decider, the CEO, and they'll choose, okay, these are the top. We'll vote. Everybody votes, and then the CEO will say, these are the top, say, 5 approaches I want to consider. And then we'll divide up and we'll say, okay, somebody needs to take a sheet of paper and write a sentence or 2 about why this is a good idea and maybe draw a doodle of it. Right, okay, for this approach, here's what I think is good about it. And here's just a back of the napkin sketch of what I have in mind, how it would look. We all then look at those approaches and we'll take a note underneath with sticky notes. What's a criteria this is good at? What does this do well at? Often, founders will put on a sticky note, this is exciting to build. I'm excited about building this. And that's often a really important consideration because there's a lot that goes into that. There's a lot of maybe intuition about something. And often after you've gone through the more rational, logical progression of the standard ways of looking at it, you find that, excitement is really important. Often might be something like we can find a partner who will do this with us, a company partner who can help us distribute this. So it's things that might be particular to the kind of business that a startup is in. But I always trust that the team themselves are going to have good insights into what makes a good lens. And once we've gotten warmed up by doing those classic ones, that's kind of the key. You warm up a bit, then you're kind of in the right mode, and it's easy to make one or two or three more.
So once you've got your criteria, let's just take excitement. I like that one.
Yeah.
How do you figure out what's your X and Y axis? Because I think of excitement, I'm like, well, that's just one axis. So how then do you tease that apart into the two things that you need to plot your options on?
Well, it depends. It's like I'd turn it around.
You're such
right?
a consultant, Jake.
Yeah, I know, totally, right? So, but if we were working together and you were saying, gosh, I'm thinking about doing a new book and I have a few different ideas, I want to sort of think about excitement. Well, I might say, well, okay, what are the components of excitement for you? For founders, it's often, this is fun to build, or I have conviction. I have a feeling or like an intuition about this. It's going to kind of vary from person to person. Often I think the lens that best captures this is like the conviction lens, and the components are excitement and like matches the mission. That's a really common extra lens for founders.
Something else that I know, are very thoughtful about making decisions on meetings. And when we were discussing this podcast over email, you're talking about how you're trying to reduce the number of meetings that you're going to. And you used a term called the medicine in the meeting. Can you talk me through how you're rethinking meetings?
Well, yeah. So I have a son who has a medical condition. He's got these headaches that have been going on almost nonstop for several years. And we've been trying to find ways to help with it, and, tried all these different migraine treatments, and mostly they didn't help that much. And not long ago, we had an appointment with a new doctor. He turned 21, and so he had to go see an adult, a neurologist for adults instead of for children. And he found this doctor who is a nurse practitioner and has been seeing migraine patients for decades and is very enthusiastic about the treatment of migraines. And in the appointment with her, she said, "You're a new patient. I'd like you to come in at the end of the day." And so we said, okay. And when we got in there, she said, okay, we're going to be here for at least a couple of hours because I want to know everything about what's going on with you. And this is a person who is just inherently super curious about this the topic that she treats. She's inherently extremely curious about migraines. She's fascinated with them and doesn't want to take anything for granted about what's been done before. So she wanted the entire backstory, everything, and spent a good couple of hours going through all of this. And then before we left, we ended up spending a third hour during which she tried some things. The point of all this is that in this meeting, usually you see the doctor, and we've had a series of excellent doctors for him, but you see them and it's a half an hour and you're gone, and that's the usual. And in this meeting, it's a meeting, it's an appointment, but it is a kind of meeting. We're there for 3 hours, and she's trying to uncover everything in the background that might be going on, and then saying, okay, this gives me an idea of a couple of experiments. Now, instead of just telling you about them and having you go off and do them on your own, some of them you have to, but some of them we can do right now. Let's start doing this. And I left that appointment both encouraged and optimistic that maybe there was some new hope for my son with these other approaches, but also thinking I should apply this to the work that I do, because like the nurse who helped us, I'm deeply curious. I love my work, and I'm deeply curious about the people who we work with and the problems that they have, and I want to solve them. Why do I meet with them for a half an hour or an hour? It's just the default on the calendar. It doesn't really make sense. It's better if I could meet with them for 2 hours, or 3 hours. And in a way, I already do this because we work in sprints whenever possible. And my general policy is to not have meetings if I can avoid them, except then go all in and be working together for like 2 days or 5 days. But I thought, there's something in between. Sometimes we can just jump right in and do something. And that's been a new source of experiments to say, can I meet with people for a shorter amount of time or not at all, 15 minutes or not at all. But then also offer, okay, there's, when we talk, let's also have these sessions where it's 2 or 3 hours and we dive right into it. So that's the medicine, delivering the medicine right in the meeting instead of just talking about what might happen in the future, doing it together.
I love everything that you've just described about how you think about meetings, and my brain is working overtime going, oh my gosh, I think about my diary. And I mean, one of the things we talk to our clients about at Inventium is not defaulting to 30 or 60-minute meetings. But I'm now thinking, how do I make decisions? And I'm probably thinking more so in the context of sales or business development meetings, which I typically will have for 30 to 60 minutes, depending on how complex I think the brief will be. But also if I'm going out in person, I will generally default to a longer time, but never 2 hours. But in my mind, I'm like, well, maybe some of those I should be going really deep. So how then do you decide where do you maybe curtail things and go 15 minutes, and where do you go like the whole 2 hours or longer?
I haven't totally figured this out. This is a new idea to me. And what I have been trying to do is think about every time when I'm scheduling a meeting, I try to remember, and it's hard because the default is very strong. The 30-minute to an hour default is very strong. So if I'm meeting someone for the first time, that's maybe actually a good time for the longer meeting, but it's really socially awkward to say, let's meet for 2 hours. Like that's a lot. That's like, wow, it's a lot of Jake. I don't know. I've never met you before. I'm not sure I want to get on board for that 2-hour call. So what I have been trying to do is have the half-hour call or the, be maybe like to be ready to offer the 2-hour call. And this is the context I'm talking about is meeting a new founder usually. So, if I'm meeting someone new, have the first call be sort of like, hey, I'm kind of normal. I won't try, 30 minutes is fine. And then as we're talking, like maybe, oh, there's something here I could help you with right away. Like, let's find a 2-hour block to do it. It's a little easier with people who I already know. So founders in whom we have already invested, and I can say, okay, this is a 2-hour thing. We can solve this on a call rather than doing a whole sprint, or rather than me saying, here's my advice to you, let's work on it together. And I have found it's very fun. So I just like having it as a tool in the tool belt, like an option to go to. And I haven't figured out a master plan for how it works for everything. I don't have that yet, but I just like it, and it feels so good when that meeting happens and it's longer and we work together in the meeting. And an hour is always a rush to get something meaningful done. So yeah.
Something else I like about that is particularly, and I think because for me, it's just really clear in the sales process of where a 2-hour deep dive / consulting while I'm also trying to understand the problem meeting could influence is just that escalation of commitment, because I'm spending so much time with this new person, and I'm probably doing so because I'm really keen to start a working relationship with their organization. And I think just the gesture of offering 2 hours of your time is so unique when, meetings can be just so transactional, I think.
Absolutely. I always struggle in the shorter meetings. So I do this investing work. Me and my co-author, John Zaratsky, who I think you've spoken to in the past, and another friend of ours named Eli Blee Goldman, we run this venture fund called Character Capital. We invest in early stage startups. And I won't speak for them, but for me, I do this investing work simply because I love to work with people at the beginning of a big project when they're just starting out. And it's really fun with startups. It's especially fun with startups because they're starting from scratch and they have to figure out a way to make it work. It's a survival thing for their company. And all of that is just a wonderful context for me to get to help them out and to learn about how to make projects work the best, and then hopefully share things like the book click that have ideas about what I learn. I just love doing it. In a meeting with a prospective company, with a founder in whom we might invest, there is not enough time to get in and really get into that stuff and show this is how it is when we work together and do the part that I love the most. And so it is this kind of sales conversation. They're selling me and I'm selling them on we're a great partner to invest in you, and they're selling me on we're a great company, you should invest in us. And it's too short of a time. Everybody's just pitching each other. And so, yeah, it's lovely. It is lovely to get to do that, because if I feel like a lot of the pretense falls away and we get to do more of what we genuinely want to be doing, which is not to just put on a show and show slides, but it's to be together and work together in a more human way. That's actually quite sincere.
Mm. I want to talk about another thing that you have been thinking about, which you've termed leave money on the table. I don't want to paraphrase. Can you tell me what you've been thinking about there, and maybe some experiments that you've been doing?
I was just recently hanging out with my friend Jonathan Courtney, and he was talking about how when people say you're leaving money on the table by not doing this thing, to him, that is a message that he does not want to do that thing. He says, there's something about the framing of you're leaving money on the table that is a signal to me that, oh, I'm doing something that may not make sense by conventional evaluation, but I must really not want to do it. And so I'm going to keep doing that behavior. People tell him he's leaving money on the table to try to spur him to do this thing. And he's like, that's a signal to me that I've got it figured out. I don't want to do that thing. And I know that's a bit convoluted, but the thing that I took away from that was, gosh, there are a lot of conventional wisdom bits out there. There are a lot of conventional wisdom frameworks about how you ought to behave, things you ought to do in business, because it's making the most of everything. And a simple one for me is being really active on social media, especially on LinkedIn. And it's a thing that, if you've started to develop followers, or if you're trying to write books, or you're trying to get something out there, an easy way to continue to engage with people is to continue to post on, let's say, LinkedIn. And so by continuing to do that, it's going to help you out with all the other stuff. So if I don't do it, I'm leaving money on the table, right? It doesn't take that long to write a post. It doesn't take that long to respond to people's comments and be active on there. And by not doing it, I've got all these potential connections, these potential people who might see my stuff, and I'm just leaving that money sitting there, and I'm walking away from the table. And I do post on LinkedIn occasionally, but I have found that when I'm more active on it, just something about the way my brain works, it's very hard for me to do other stuff. It's very hard for me to do big stuff. So if I'm writing a book, posting on LinkedIn is devastating to me, because I have to shift gears. It's very slow to what makes a good book chapter is not what makes a good LinkedIn post. So now what makes a good LinkedIn post? And you can almost hear the gears grinding in my head, LinkedIn, trying to boot up the LinkedIn software. And then once I make the post, then I'm like, well, I want to respond to the people who write comments. And so now I'm monitoring it, and I'm stressed out about, did people reply? Do they like me? If they don't, then I'm stressed out about that. If they do, then I'm I have to keep going back and writing more comments and replying to more comments. So that's an example where I think this notion of, if I feel that something is unnatural or hurting my main efforts, sometimes that's a signal that I just need to expand my comfort zone. I need to spend more time outside of my comfort zone so that my comfort zone gets bigger. I need to suck it up and go on LinkedIn, right? That might be the answer. But sometimes the answer is I'm avoiding that thing because of a good reason, and conventional wisdom doesn't help me in this case. And so that's the whole idea with leaving money on the table, is sometimes leaving money on the table is really smart, because you're saving your time for what you perceive to be, what I might perceive to be, a bigger pot of money somewhere else.
I love that thinking. So how then, because it sounds to me that that's almost become a tripwire for you in terms of deciding where to put your time. Like, how does that play out in the day to day? Like, I love the LinkedIn example. How else, like, and where else have you caught yourself going, oh, I'm leaving money on the table? And then that then triggers you to go down this decision-making path almost.
I'm on the lookout for commitments that either came from me or from outside folks. It doesn't matter, but a commitment that I've signed up for with the expectation that it's going to return something. I want to reevaluate those. My co-author John and I started a podcast recently, and we said, hey, let's do this podcast, and we should do it every week, because that's kind of how you continue having people, show up and listen to your podcast. You probably know this. And we recorded a few episodes, and it was really fun. And then I had this leaving money on the table sort of trigger of like, well, if we don't keep doing it every week, we're leaving money on the table. And then I realized, but wait a second, I'm starting to feel like it's a better idea if we do this in seasons, because I don't have the continual well of new ideas to do it every week. And we're not going to put in the effort, at least right now, to like find a guest every week. That's a hassle. Like every time you got to find a guest, and you got to deal with their, schedule. You got to deal with their everything. Got to prepare for it. It's a lot. It's a full-time job. So I realized, like, okay, I'm going to have to leave money on the table by not making it a weekly thing. We're going to have to take breaks from it. And it's, I know that's not the optimal way to do it, but if it's going to happen, it has to be that way. And if that means the podcast doesn't work at all, for me, that's going to be okay, because again, for my brain, which takes a lot of gear shifting to get into a different mode, even recording a podcast in the morning might make it harder for me to do other things the rest of the day. And so I really value doing these big things, like spending a week with a company in a sprint, or writing a book. And those big things take more intense focus that is easily fractured. And it means giving up on some things that I'd like to do. Another thing that I'd like to do that I give up on, that's sort of leaving money on the table, is being really responsive on email. I'd like to be a lot more responsive than I am, but it comes at a cost. And so I have to leave the money, so to speak, on the table of being someone who people think of as being really responsive, which people like, and I value it in other people when they're responsive to me. I have to give that up, and it's a bit painful, but I think it's the right trade-off, because there's like a bigger, hopefully, treasure chest that comes from the uninterrupted work.
Because on the topic of email, actually, I've heard you talk about trying to slow your inbox, and I love that. I am a Superhuman user. I am not sure if you are also on Superhuman. So there we go, the fastest email software in the world, but you're trying to slow it down. How are you doing that, Jake?
I slow down my inbox by trying to be comfortable with the discomfort of having emails sit in my inbox. And it is a discomfort. It feels good to go through and empty it out and respond to everyone. But the more I respond, the faster then people will write back. And so there's a feedback loop there, where the more time I spend in email, the more time I'll spend in email. I can never really get on top of it. And whenever you're doing something that's important to you, the constant feedback loop of email or Slack or whatever messaging it might be, it has a cost. The slowing down the email thing is largely a practice of looking in the inbox when I do. One thing is not looking at it and trying to sprint on a focused thing throughout the day. Another thing is looking in the inbox, picking out the one or two things that I need to respond to right away, and then leaving everything else sitting in there for a week, it might be 2 weeks sometimes. It's embarrassing. But eventually when I get back saying, I'm so sorry, or thank you for your patience, but here's finally your response. Something
I want to ask you about finally, Jake, is because of who you are, who you talk to, the companies that you invest in and that you meet with for 2 hours or more, I would love to know, like, what are 2 or 3, pieces of software or tools or tech that are really exciting you, that you think me and maybe listeners should absolutely try out?
There are three things that I'm the most interested in or have found the most useful lately. One of them is, I'll admit this is a plug for a company that we've invested in, but it's really useful. It's a tool called Fathom, and it's a note taker for your Zoom calls or your Google Meet calls or whatever. And it's one of these, one of these note taking bots that sort of sits in your call. But I've just found it to be incredibly useful to have those text notes that I can link to afterwards and go right to the spot and replay the spot. I don't do that for calls I've had myself, but when when one person's been in a call and they say, hey, here's what happened, can you give me your opinion? And I can go back and look and see what the conversation was. It's just a huge time saver. I really like that. So that's an interesting one because it does the note taking for you. And there's a pro and con to having notes taken for you. It's nice to not have to take notes, but if I don't take the notes myself, they don't really stick in my brain. So the other thing is a Remarkable tablet. And I've had one for a long time. I just got the newest one. I'm not sure if I think the newest one is better than the older one. It's got like a backlit screen and it's kind of heavier. It's bigger. It's nicer, certainly in some ways, but the old one is also great. And anyway, I have the old one at my desk and I have the new one kind of, in my bedside table. And I like taking notes on a device that I can't check email on, that I can't get distracted on. I just can write notes. There's always paper, and I can easily print copies or email copies or whatever, but it's a very simple device that I love. And the third thing, which I'm still kind of developing how to use, I'm using right now as we're on this call, is a teleprompter. So the teleprompter is, it's a screen with a reflective mirror. Do you have one, Amantha?
I am looking at you through a teleprompter.
You're looking at the teleprompter. You're making great eye contact. Now, I got this and I don't really have the camera dialed in. So if people are watching on YouTube and I look like I'm on a grainy webcam, you can blame the teleprompter. I did have a better camera before. I'll get a better one. I'll look like Amantha in the future at some point in terms of resolution, crispness, and everything. But the thing that I found is so great about this that surprised me. I did it because I just wanted to look better on camera. I wanted to be making eye contact and I wanted people to watch and think, what a great guy, But what I found about it that's surprising is how much more comfortable it is to have a conversation over video with a teleprompter. And I didn't cue into this before, but normally when I'm on a video call, I'm constantly thinking about I should be making eye contact and I'll make the effort to look at the webcam, but then I'm not looking at the person. And I feel like my brain is kind of straining to do that. Or I'm looking at the person and they're not quite making eye contact with me, or I'm just not sure where to look. And it's fatiguing. And I didn't really notice how fatiguing it was. I knew Zoom calls are fatiguing, but since switching to the teleprompter for calls, I'm like, it's great. I feel so much more like I'm actually in the room with the person because where I'm looking is where they are. And I don't know. It's been nice. So I'm in early days with this, but that's the third item.
It's the best. It's so it is quite novel, but also I think so important to be able to look someone in the eyes in a virtual meeting. I used to think, I need this kind of setup because I do a lot of virtual keynotes and the podcast. But I think for everyone that is able to afford even a basic setup, it makes so much difference with just connecting with the other human on the end of your virtual call.
It's wild.
Jake.
Thank you so much for watching. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming out next on How I Work.